For the following week, we were supposed to kind of experiment with Word and think of using it as an art tool instead of just a functional software. For homework, we were supposed to kind of take this further, and we had to pick from a hat a different process that we would kind of use that week to create a piece. And so all of them were different softwares that you wouldn't necessarily create art with. So there was no like Illustrator, Photoshop, all of that. It was very much so just like photos, 3D softwares, social media, that sort of thing. One of them was your desktop. And I did end up getting photos, which personally I already kind of experimented with that, and so I was kind of like stuck because I didn't want to kind of go into the same territory that I was already exploring. And so I did kind of want to make the photos kind of on a much smaller scale and include a lot more photos into this piece to kind of make it at least somewhat different than what I have been doing in the past. And so I created one image using a lot more photos that were a lot smaller. The next thing was very interesting. We were supposed to not necessarily create our own piece, but we had to create a set of rules that other people would create this piece. Just thinking about these things that you're creating something and putting something into the world, but other people are the ones actually executing the piece. And so the finished piece is not necessarily the actual artwork, but the actual list of rules that you have to follow is the artwork, and the pieces are just something backing it up. Just thinking very much so about artists like Yoko Ono. For me, I wasn't crazy about what I made. I'm not necessarily sure why I made it, but my set of rules was to create some straight lines using a ruler and a pencil, and then going on top of that with a rock and smearing it with red paint and overlaying it, and just kind of having a very interesting kind of talk between the lines and the red paint. Again, I'm not necessarily crazy about this. We were working on it for the next several weeks, kind of developing it, but I'm not necessarily crazy about in the direction that it went in, just because I felt like I did pick something that wasn't necessarily challenging or really kind of something you could push a lot. I do wish I could have changed this, but here we are. It's too late now. I did kind of learn a lot from the actual kind of what we talked about in the class, but not necessarily so much about what actually made. The next project that we had, I was very enthusiastic about. I really loved it. I felt like it was really challenging mentally. He did want us to take a 3D object and turn it into a 2D art piece using 3 different processes basically. Creating these 3 different pieces, one was technology based, another one was drawing based, and then one had to incorporate the actual piece that you're using. And so for the technology one, which I think was my favorite of the 3, I photographed this orchid from all possible angles. I did really want to take a scientific approach to it, it being something very romanticized, very almost elusive or like seductive again. I did want to make it very scientific, and so I photographed it from all possible angles, and I think that was my favorite piece of the 3. For the other 2, for the drawing one, I kind of measured every possible aspect of this orchid and created that into a piece. And for the last one, I did kind of break apart the orchid. I flattened every piece out and had that be that piece. This was a project I really loved. It was kind of really cool thinking about these and thinking about kind of where you could take them, and just the idea of turning something 3D into 2D, but still kind of incorporating every single aspect into it. It was very kind of much of a cubist moment, if you will. For the following week, we were supposed to take this further and include all 3 processes into one finished piece. And so I really wanted to work with Transparencies. I didn't necessarily work with them before. I thought it would kind of be a good opportunity to do so. In InDesign, I created this layout for this accordion book that was kind of meant to be printed on acetate. I did kind of bind it really nice and kind of put it in this very kind of like transparency paper, and then put the actual flower on top of it, just to have a nice kind of like packaging. And I think this was one of my favorite projects that I made in the class. It was something that I still have somewhere. I'm not necessarily sure where I have, but I really loved making this project. I never worked with Transparencies, and it was something that I was very much so into, and something that I would kind of use more so into my work moving on. And me going into graphic design was kind of a perfect project to kind of dabble with that. I just really loved it. it was nice. I have nothing else to say about it, but I just really loved this piece. And I guess that takes us to the final. For the final, we did have a lot of time to create it and think about it, and both for this, actually for all of our classes, we did have a lot of time to work on the final, which was something that was really nice, I guess. Most of our classes are you have one class to work on something, whether as opposed to this, we kind of had a big chunk of time to do it and kind of really elaborate on it. For our final for this class, we had to take any process that we kind of experimented with in the past. It could have been from the circles or from any project that we made the entire semester, and really kind of push it and take it as far as we could. For me, again, I really was kind of intrigued by transparencies, and so I kind of wanted to work with that more so. So basically I would create a line on these big transparency sheets using a Sharpie, and then fold the transparency to create unique or different shapes. And so it's basically creating these very intricate things that are made from a single line, essentially. The idea was really nice. I'm not necessarily crazy about the way it turned out. I would have kind of wanted to push it in a different direction, but the teacher was very much so interested in this idea and was kind of trying to combine both of these, of what I wanted to do and what the teacher wanted to do, which was kind of a detriment because it was a little bit all over the place. I was still overall happy with it and the way it came out, but it was something that wasn't necessarily super cohesive, which is just, I guess, something to look out for. But that was, I guess, the entirety for this class. And for spatial, which was the last studio class that we had, it was very different. I had Gareth Jones, and he kind of run the class very differently than most teachers. Instead of having assignments due every single class, you really only had 2 assignments, which was the midterm and the final, and that was kind of your only 2 grades for the class. This was just kind of a different way of thinking personally. I was kind of expected to all of these different assignments, and it was a little weird just having 2. You did have a lot of time to put into these, but I don't feel like I necessarily learned as much from this as I would have if we did have multiple assignments kind of consecutively. What kind of happened is that people would kind of start to goof off or kind of not put as much time and energy into it as if they would if it was a lot of different projects. But still, with what we were given, the assignments were kind of challenging and dealing with topics that were very kind of cosmical, I guess. The first one had to deal with space, and then the final had to deal with time. For the midterm, we really had 2 projects, both kind of revolving around space. One had to deal with motion, and then the other one with light. For the one dealing with light, I did kind of want to play with this idea of kind of light pouring through a window and appearing on the floor, but having this whole shape be the actual piece or the negative space. It's something that isn't, you can't necessarily see it, but it's still there, and it's kind of just turning it into a solid shape. And so I did create this building where it had all of these light beams kind of overlapping. I wasn't necessarily crazy about it. I feel like I could have put more time into it, but I did create this idea kind of late going towards the midterm, and I did kind of the best that I could using the time circumstance. I recognize that it could have been pushed a lot further, and my grade on this project personally reflected that. I got a really good grades on mostly everything, but this project was kind of the one that I didn't necessarily get a good grade on. Again, he is kind of a harsh teacher, and that does push you, but it also can be a little like but anyways, for the movement piece, I really wanted to take a body part and just kind of angulate it and just show the movement of that done through casting. And so I did kind of this general area and just kind of tried to have it show motion through that. He also wasn't crazy about this piece. This midterm was just not my project. He said that it didn't necessarily show movement through creating this, and that it wasn't necessarily filling the assignment. I would disagree with this. I completely agreed on the last project, but actually liked the way this turned out and personally like the way it is. But that's just my personal opinion. Again, you're gonna disagree with your teachers sometimes. It's gonna happen. You shouldn't necessarily follow their aesthetic, but you should still kind of take it into consideration and know that you might get a better grade if you do kind of follow what they want you to create. So it's just kind of this fine line of still being true to yourself, but also just pushing yourself and experimenting at the same time. Moving on to the final, he really loved this and I really loved making it. It was something that I was very interested in doing and something that I'm really happy with the way it turned out. It kind of like dug me out of the hole that was the midterm project. Gareth is really known for being harsh in critiques. If he doesn't like a piece, he's actually gonna move on from it and not even talk about it. For this, we had to deal with time and kind of take time in whatever direction we could take it in. For the first week, we were supposed to research time and create this really big piece of paper that kind of had as many facts and like things about time that we could find. For me, I was really interested in this idea of time as something that is very different to everyone and no one really perceives the same events in time the same. So say you're at some event and there's a lot of people there, no one there is going to kind of perceive it in the same way because everyone kind of has their own past experiences, their own current experiences, and no one is really going to kind of see the same events in time the same way as anyone else. And so I really just want to take this idea of this book that really you couldn't access. I bound it with saran wrap and then went back. I didn't want it to be really clean since it is the final project. So on top of the saran wrap, on top of it, I put acetate. And it's just this book that you really can't access. Any event in time, you are gonna not have the whole picture of it. You're always gonna have a piece missing. You're never gonna have this whole picture of what an event was. You really can't tap into anyone else's experiences or thoughts and ideas, and so that's why there is kind of the square cut into it. You can't access anyone else's information, so you're always going to have a piece of any event missing. You are just yourself and you're only part of an event, not the whole event. So he ended up really loving the idea and loving the way it turned out. This was his favorite piece that I made in the class. I guess we only made 2 pieces and it could only have gone up after the midterm. But I'm just really happy with the way this turned out and I still have this piece. I love it. I learned how to bind a book. That was fun. And it was just something that I really loved the idea, so it was something that I was really passionate about, and I guess I did good at because I was passionate about it. Whatever you do, you should kind of be interested in what you're doing. If you don't like what you're doing, even if you don't necessarily have that much time left, like, you should restart and do something that you're passionate about. It does show in your work. And honestly, that kind of brings me to the end of the year. It was such a great year, and it's crazy how fast it went by. I know that the next 3 years are gonna go by just as fast, and that's honestly kind of mind-boggling to think about. I felt like it was yesterday when I was going into college. But anyways, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. My battery is dying, so I'm gonna go. I love you guys. See you guys later. Bye.